I have a couple of guests coming up in a few minutes, and they'll be talking with us about some issues taking place, really affecting a lot of younger people. Who people joke that that's not our demographic, but one of the young men who's going to be in the next half hour, very much, I'll put it this way, in tune to the discussions that we have on News Radio 1310 KLIX. And you got to remember, it's a talk format, and you're going to have a lot of news and politics and other things going on. He's a member of the Twin Falls Youth Council. I think he's bringing along at least another member as well. They'll be joining us for a few minutes on air just after 8:30. Also coming up at 8:20, Ella Donahue from the College of Southern Idaho telling us what's going on at the college, especially this weekend. A couple of different shows that you may be interested in taking in while you're looking for something to do, because we are headed today for a high temperature in the low to mid 70s. That'll be the warmest it is, though, for probably another week. By next Friday, we'll be restored to that 70-degree range, but at the moment, this is going to be the nicest day we have for quite a stretch. We may even see some rain finally in the weather forecast. I mean, it's been a long time. Coming up on Monday, not necessarily heavy, but at least some, which is better than none. And then one other thing that I wanted to talk about, at least at the top of the show today, I went online. I don't do this very often. I went online to a government website the other day, and I was just deciding to leave a message. In fact, I went to whitehouse.gov. Whitehouse.com is not the right website. And we should point out that at one time, I believe whitehouse.com was actually a pornographic website, but whitehouse.gov is the official site of the administration in Washington. And after the election in Israel, I wanted to sort of, how shall we put it, needle the President of the United States. Not that he needs it, he's getting it from a lot of different sides, but I just wanted to chime in and add my 2 cents as well. So I did that the other day. And yesterday, as I was getting ready to leave work, I came across this from something called NextGov. Now, if you're going to be going online to any government website and with the intention of needling someone, you better beware that they may be needling you back. At 11:23 a.m. on Thursday, 150,980 people, the writer says, more than the population of Alexandria, Virginia, were browsing U.S. federal websites. 5,000 of them visited an IRS.gov page called Where's My Refund? Another 2,091 were checking forecasts on weather.gov. These stats came from a dashboard tracking user behavior that tracks who's doing what when they're actually on these websites, what they're looking at, what device they use, as well as their browser and operating system. The White House's U.S. Digital Service, along with 2 General Service Administration tech teams, 18F and the Digital Analytics Program, launched the site Thursday. Created over the course of 2 to 3 weeks, the site debuted during Sunshine Week. Wow, you want to talk about Orwellian, a national effort dedicated to government transparency. Yes, we're unveiling a new tracking system so we can maintain a database on everybody that looks at a government website during this week of transparency. Hello. Now, the writer of this story is writing this about how wonderful this technology is because it will allow the government to figure out what people are looking at, mostly, and what device you're using while you're looking at it. But on the other hand, of course, it's also tracking you. So the White House team has learned that more traffic comes from phones and tablets. That's the big part of it right now, that most people are checking out government websites while they're apparently sitting, I don't know, maybe in Starbucks having a discussion on race. So I looked at that and I thought, here we go again. We're giving them the rope to hang ourselves. Really, I mean, think about that for a moment. And no one's objecting, and the story talks about how wonderful this system is and how great it will be, and it will help government with efficiency and government better address the problems that Americans have, while they know exactly every movement you make. But never mind. Government would never do anything bad to you. No, not in the least. Government always has your best interests in mind. Big government in America is a benevolent institution. 8:11. You're listening to Bill Colley this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as online at newsradio1310.com. 30. We're starting out chilly today, but looking to add another 40 to 45 degrees before the day comes to a close. So yes, government always has your best interests in mind, especially those people who lead government. This is from the Daily Caller. And the headline is, Hillary Clinton, let's push adults in camps to fix America's fund deficit. I have heard so many people telling me over the years about these things called FEMA camps. And they literally have these places that are set up all around the country. Some of them actually have the barbed wire facing the wrong way, in other words, to keep people in versus people from trying to get in. These do exist in a lot of places. Well, we're told fusion centers is another word. We're told that if we ever had a disaster, we could round everyone up there and protect them. Right. As if you wouldn't be safe sitting out on your ranch somewhere in Idaho. But that's probably a discussion for at least a bit later in the program. In the meantime, in a paid speech, you don't think she goes around doing these things for free, do you? Before the New Jersey chapter of the American Camp Association, I didn't realize they had one of those. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton told the audience that America really needed to implement camps that adults could attend. In these camps, Clinton wants Americans to really concentrate on the important things. Quote, "We need some reminder about life skills from time to time, maybe some enrichment, certainly some time outdoors," unquote. Of course, in some parts of the world, they send people off to re-education camps, and they get lots of time outdoors, moving rocks, chopping rocks, digging ditches, doing all sorts of things, until they come along to the realization they can get out of the camp if they follow the lead of whoever happens to be in government at the time. And the writer says, on an entirely unrelated note, Joy Camp was the newspeak term for forced labor camps in George Orwell's 1984. So, government is now spying on you ever more often when you go online and look at government websites. Hillary Clinton suggests you should be sent off to a Joy Camp. We're not done. If you may remember, we talked the other day about President Obama giving a speech in Cleveland, Ohio the other day, and he said that we should make voting mandatory in the United States. Even if you're at that point where you find that you can't vote for anybody in good conscience, you would have to go vote for someone, because if you didn't, he recommends we use the Australian model, you could be fined or jailed. All right, so government now knows every move you make because you've logged on to government websites, and Mrs. Clinton wants to send you off to a re-education camp, and President Obama wants to make voting mandatory. Of course, if you vote for the right people. I think that's the important part. Maybe they'll do voting online on government websites, and then they can track you and know who you vote for, too, once they make it mandatory. And if you don't vote for the right person, they can punish you and send you off to Mrs. Clinton's camps. Now here's another one. Al Gore gets Orwellian on climate change skeptics, calls for punishment. You may remember Mr. Gore. "I was the rightful president, and people liked me because I was such an exciting personality. My wife Tipper liked it so much she got up and left." This comes as well from a website called Personal Liberty. And the rhetoric he was giving a speech started to get continually harsher. Well, you may remember seeing old photographs of Adolf Hitler at various rallies, and he would start off, he would walk up to the microphone and say something meekly and mildly in German, if you can actually do that in the German language. I mean, it's such a guttural language, it's a little difficult to come off in a meek manner. And then as he would talk, his voice would start to rise, and then all of a sudden his arms would start to move, and then within a matter of minutes he would be screaming and throwing his arms around, and the crowd would be in a frenzy. Well, Mr. Gore was doing something like this. He started off mildly, and then he actually had a quote in his speech that said, quote, "Punish the deniers," unquote. Quote, "We have this denial industry cranked up constantly. In addition to 99% of the scientists and all the professional scientific organizations, now Mother Nature is weighing in," unquote. Gore suggested passing out punishment, or in his words, quote, "a price on denial in politics," unquote, by shaming elected leaders who don't share his agenda into legislating punitive cap and trade regulations that remove profits from the fossil fuel industry. So right now he's just talking about shaming. But again, we have government websites that are tracking your every move, what you're looking at, what type of device you're looking at the government website from. You've got potentially the next president of the United States, and she's saying that we should send people off to camp so they can learn a little joy and relaxation and get some work done outdoors. You've got the president of the United States saying, well, if people don't want to vote, we'll force them to vote. And now you've got Al Gore saying if they continue to deny climate change is man-made, then we ought to do something harsh in punishing them. Gore could also be the next president of the United States because she could falter. You may have heard some stories about that in the last couple of weeks. I just passed that along. Don't you understand the direction that these people are trying to take us? We've talked about this on this program in, I think, the last couple of months a few times, and maybe even once earlier this week. But the totalitarian nature of these folks is so extreme. I don't know any other way to explain it but to draw some historical comparisons. And I've used that before. What happened in France after the French Revolution? What happened in Cambodia when the Khmer Rouge took over? Or what happened when the communists took over in China and Russia? I mean, these are the type of people we have here are frightening when they start talking about this. It's mild at the moment, but you get a picture of the mindset, and it's a group mindset. It's not just Mr. Obama. It's not just Mrs. Clinton. It's not just Al Gore. As a group, you can start to see how the left thinks in this country. And it's all about coercion and forcing people to follow their lead in what they believe. And if you don't believe it, you see it happening now in religious faith, where you're being told that your faith is bigoted and hateful, and that the books that you've used in support of your worship for 2,000 years are also hateful and bigoted. And you cannot dissent any longer without being run out of a job, for crying out loud. I'm going to talk about this a little later in the program. There is a great movie. I just saw some of the reviews on it. You will not find it in Twin Falls, but if you choose to drive to Idaho Falls, Meridian, Nampa, or Boise, you may be able to see this movie. It's opening today, and as we progress in the program, I hope to have an opportunity to talk about it. But it's called Do You Believe? And it's got a great cast, and I was looking over some of the reviews on it today. Certainly some liberals are panning it because they don't understand it. But overall, I was checking out, was it IDMB, one of those websites where the ratings for the movie are actually quite good. But it tells us that some of us who don't believe in the groupthink are going to be, how shall we put it, put on the anvil. But we're called to be put on the anvil. And I was looking through the details of the film, and I would like to see it, but trying to convince anybody on the local level apparently to carry that movie is going to be difficult. I guess the folks who run the local cinemas are not faithful, or apparently they are of a different political stripe, and they don't believe in faith in running movies here about faith. Even though whenever these movies actually hit the theaters, have you ever seen the numbers, the droves of people who show out? God Is Not Dead, was that the one last year? And they made it for a shoestring budget, and then they made a profit of $60 million. So I think there is an audience for this type of movie out there, and we are being called to stand up against what could be some very serious tyranny sometime soon. 20 minutes after 8 o'clock, we're going to be joined in just a few minutes by Ella Donahue. She is with the College of Southern Idaho. She's got a rundown of some of the events taking place there this coming weekend. Hope you can stick around for that. Also, coming up at 8:30, or just after the 8:30 break, we'll have some members of the Twin Falls Youth Council who will be joining us. Still 30 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as newsradio1310.com. Now, these two who are just in the studio with us, Jonah and Jesse, you'd think that, all right, they've done their duty for the day, but no, now they're off to school. That's it. The one thing I can say, being young, you're healthy, and you feel great. Your joints don't ache, but you know what? As you get older, you don't have to go to class. Sweet, sweet, sweet thing. Hey, a couple of quick messages from some of our fine sponsors this morning. Western States Bus Services is hiring part-time bus drivers right now. Split shifts, 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. You also should know pay is $10.75 per hour. You can apply today by contacting 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. Also, coming up on our program next Wednesday, this is getting to be a regular feature with us, between 8:30 and 9 o'clock on Wednesday mornings, we have Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine, which is located right here in Twin Falls. We're going to be talking next week about weight loss. There are a number of new treatments for people who are trying to lose weight, and they aren't necessarily painful, and they don't necessarily require that you walk around feeling hungry all of the time. So we're going to be talking with the medical professionals from Tripp Family Medicine about that very issue. We'd like you to know that this takes place every Wednesday between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, so if you have questions for the doctor or the nurses or the physician's assistants who drop by and join us, please feel free to give them a call when they're actually in the studio with us. You can tune in each Wednesday at 8:30 a.m. for Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine in Twin Falls, across from the post office on Fillmore Street, because life's too short not to feel good. Do want to say thank you to everybody for joining us this morning. I know a lot of people are really gearing up for the weekend, and I was planning to do that myself, and I was looking for something to do, and I saw a trailer the other day online for a movie called Do You Believe? And I said to myself, I've got to go see this movie. It really looks fascinating because what we are seeing happen across this country is people of faith. Well, it depends on your faith now, doesn't it? If you're a Muslim or a Hindu, you get celebrated and well, that's because folks on the left think that you're oppressed by the majority faith in this country, which still remains Christianity, or at least a watered down version of Christianity in so many places. After all, when you've got the Presbyterian Church USA suddenly saying that they're going to be performing same-sex marriages within their churches and recognizing those as legitimate and throwing the Bibles out the windows in order to justify it, that is a watered-down form of Christianity, or it's calling yourself a Christian when, in fact, you're not actually, in any sense, Christian. But we have this ongoing battle that is taking place in this country between those who really seriously believe. And you think about it. Look at Phil Robertson from Duck Dynasty. Look what happened to him when he spoke about his beliefs, which are very much embedded in the Bible. He was nearly run out of the Arts and Entertainment Network. There was talk that the Duck Dynasty show was going to be canceled. The fire chief in Atlanta, Georgia, also a very devout Christian, published a book about his beliefs. And when he never even tried to push this on anyone in his fire department, but when some people asked for copies, he provided copies, he was fired for being, as they said, bigoted and hateful. This goes on all across America. The Roman Catholic Archbishop of San Francisco has said that people who work in his school system should follow the church's beliefs, and now there are calls for his ouster because they want to try to bring their non-Christian beliefs and promote them within his schools. This is a serious threat. So this movie is coming out. It's called Do You Believe? Check out some of the people who are acting in this. Ted McGinley, Mira Sorvino, Sean Astin, Delroy Lindo, Brian Bosworth, Sybil Shepherd, and Lee Majors. You may know all of their names, right? So I saw the trailer online the other day. This looks like this movie could be a really big hit, and I thought, I'm going to go see it this weekend. So then I pulled up the movie listings at our local cinema. Guess what? It's not playing there. 848, Bill Colley with you. 32 at our studios. This is News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. But if you'd like to drive to Idaho Falls, Meridian, Boise, or Nampa, you can go see it. I think it's also playing up in Coeur d'Alene. So if you'd like to, spend a couple of days on the road with the family, it's a good way to see the movie. But if you wanted to just go see the movie tomorrow afternoon and you live in the Twin Falls, Jerome area, you're not going to be able to go see it. You're going to have to plan an entire weekend away just to see the movie. Why is that? I mean, are there expectations that the movie won't perform that well, despite the fact that history shows that these types of movies do very, very well at the box office? Hello? I mean, I know it's not going to do the same numbers that SpongeBob did. See, now there you go. That's how you want your kids to grow up and be educated, is on that innocuous hoo-ha that's pushed at them every week on television by a Cartoon Network that is just looking to score some really big profits. So I'm going to find a way, and maybe I'll keep looking online, find a way to actually go see the movie. If I have to drive all the way to Boise to do it, I guess that's what I have to do, because it doesn't sound like it's going to be playing around here anytime soon. You can reach our program today. Telephone number is 736-0300. That is 736-0300. Or you can send me an email at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. That is bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. I spell the last name Colley. In fact, I've been doing it all my life. And then I've got a couple other quick things I wanted to mention in this first hour of the program. We told you at the top of the show yesterday that U.S. Senator Mike Crapo of Idaho is leading the charge to dismantle a government program that is being used to intimidate people who own gun shops. Legally owned gun shops. It is still legal in this country to sell firearms, deal in firearms. Now, I guess if you're standing on the street corner doing it, perhaps maybe not quite so much, but you have a highly regulated business, which when it comes to the Second Amendment, you ask yourself, why regulate it? But we have a government that doesn't trust the people. The founders did, but the current government doesn't. So you have this highly regulated business, and people who own these shops are discovering that they cannot get any credit, or that they cannot even work with people who are dealing in credit. Because if you're walking into a gun shop, most people aren't paying cash or even a check any longer, but they're using things like credit cards. And the banking industry has also been intimidated and told not to work with gun shops. This is a backdoor entry by the government to try and take firearms away from the people in the United States. I have this story today from the Daily Signal. The Daily Signal yesterday had reported about Senator Crapo's efforts. This is from today's Daily Signal. I got this in my email today. More gun sellers blocked from financial sector. Just to give you a little bit of background, this is a woman whose family runs a gun shop. I'm just giving you her first name. Felicia was in charge of finding a payment processor, which is a third-party outlet that handles credit card transactions between merchants and banks. In a world where credit cards are a primary method of payment, it's one of the first things a startup business must do. Felicia told the Daily Signal she was declined from 3 different payment processor companies, one of which, PayPal, froze her account. For a while, she only blamed herself. I just thought the whole payment gateway system was a difficult thing to get around if you're not a computer geek. But then she started learning a little bit more, and she started learning that the government was intimidating some of these people on the other side not to do business with gun shops. She came across something called Transnational, one of the few payment processors that does business with firearms and ammunition vendors. From then on, she says she didn't have much trouble. But it took her a long time getting the business off the ground, likely cost her a lot of money. And in the very beginning of any new startup, you are not living high on the hog. Here's another one. Another vendor who set up shop at his New Orleans gun show wonders why the product he sells would make his business more scrutinized. Honestly, he says, we are relegated to porn sites. Think about this for a moment. Bart Wilson, owner of Advanced Weapon Systems and Security Concepts in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, said, quote, I've actually had this conversation with bank managers, and for example, that is Bank One's policy. Gun companies are no different from porn sites as far as they're concerned, unquote. And this is all coming down from the Obama administration, which, as you know, has also tried to ban certain types of ammunition, which would then make certain firearms worthless. And if they can intimidate the gun shops eventually go out of business. What will they then do? Because people will start going into their basements and they'll get these laser printers, and they're going to start actually, and there are online. If you go online, you can actually find the plans. You just quickly download those, you hit send to print, and it starts building the various pieces for your firearms. They may be a little flimsy. They may not be, milled quite the way that with the expertise you get out of something like a manufacturer like Ithaca or someone else. But you're going to have people who still will be able to find ways around this. So what's the next step? Will they come kicking down your door because you're actually doing it on your own? Are they trying to force people that? Maybe that's why Hillary Clinton wants the camps open, so we can send all of those people off. It's 8:54. Bill Colley again with you this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX, and newsradio1310.com online means you can listen to us anywhere all over the world. In a related story, Texas may be joining Idaho in one feature. The Texas Senate is set to pass a campus carry bill. Now, the question the writer asks here in this story, this is from the Christian Science Monitor, which is a fairly liberal publication. All right, they are extremely to the left. But they're asking, how many people actually carry firearms on campus? So does passing the law to actually allow concealed carry on campus, does it actually make much of a difference? I'm bringing this up, speaking of Texas. A friend of mine took a job about a dozen years ago at a TV station in Texas. He was working at the NBC affiliate in Houston. The company that owned his television station had a policy that said no firearms on the premises. He said it was perhaps the most ignored company regulation he ever saw. This is Texas, after all. He said a great many of his coworkers were armed in the office and also out on the street while they were covering stories, because it's a little dangerous sometimes. As a reporter, I worked for 17 years in the news business before moving into talk. I got roughed up 3 different times while I was covering various stories. Never got seriously hurt, but I got roughed up 3 different times. And I'll tell you what, one time by a group of gangbangers in an inner city while I was walking down a street trying to do some interviews with some neighbors about the gang problem. And it would have been a good idea for me, perhaps at that point, to actually be armed. And I could have defended myself if things got out of hand because I looked up and down the street and I didn't see a policeman anywhere near where I happened to be at the time. You know, what are they going to do? Come clean up my blood and say this is a terrible tragedy? But he was telling me that this was the case at the television station he worked at in Houston. If you are in Texas, then you can pretty well surmise that a great many people there are carrying their own firearms already on campuses. I had a friend named Max when I was in college, and everyone knew Max carried. No one ever busted him for it. We just all kept quiet because we liked the idea that Max was living in the dorm with us, and that if anybody came charging into the dorm someday and started shooting at us, that Max would drop them in a matter of seconds. I also remember in Texas a horrible story about 25 years ago came out of a Luby's cafeteria, I think in Killeen, Texas, where a guy walked in and he just started shooting people dead, killed more than 20 people before taking his own life. If somebody in that Luby's had been armed, they could have actually taken him down and saved a great many lives. But no one inside the restaurant was armed. And you have a lot of restaurants that they fight that whole notion of customers actually coming in and carrying. Well, all right, the day someone walks in to rob you, if a customer is armed, he's going to save you and perhaps your business as well in that situation. So we're hearing all of these protesters come out in Texas saying that this shouldn't happen. Texas is not likely the place, though, that is going to become a great liberal bastion when it comes to notions of gun ownership. I get the impression that this law will manage to pass, and Governor Abbott, who took over for Governor Rick Perry, likely to sign it into law. Got about 30 seconds. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley.
Yes, that story in Texas, the Luby's, if I'm not mistaken, there's a lady there with her parents, and she left her gun in the car. She said if she went in front of the NRA or Congress saying that if she'd had her gun, that she could have taken care of him.
Thank you for reminding me of that. I remember that now.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you very, very much. I happened to be in San Antonio at a convention in 1998, and I saw a big sign for Luby's Cafeterias, and never been to one. But there you go. I mean, that was a situation where someone could have brought that to a quick end, and it didn't happen. But all of the screaming memes on the left just want to ensure that you're a sitting duck everywhere you go. 8:58. Well, somebody might get hurt. You know, if you add up all of the accidents, think about the college professor here in Idaho that accidentally shot himself in one of his thighs. How often does that actually happen? We have 330 million people in this country. Anecdotal evidence simply doesn't count. I've got more coming up. One more hour with Bill Colley this morning. You're listening to Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX as well as newsradio1310.com. 33. Make it a 33 now at our studios. Hey, got something coming up pretty soon. General David Petraeus has an interesting take on the situation with Iran. If you've not yet heard the story, University of Georgia, the fraternities there have banned women from wearing hoop skirts. Not that it's been very stylish for the last 150 years, no, but occasionally, for historical reasons, a lot of these sororities are 150, 160 years old. The women come out and they wear hoop skirts as part of some historical just traditions that they use. Well, the fraternities have decided that the hoop skirts are racist. They've banned them. Racist hoop skirts. Yes, these hoop skirts are terrible. As we're walking down the street, they try to tear themselves away from our waists and beat up people of color. And you know, there was some Marxist professor behind this, most likely cheering this whole thing on. When are we going to get these dopes out of our campuses and restore something that's a little bit more normal to the whole equation? I guess not anytime soon. More reason to take online courses and go to college that way than to spend yourself into deep debt and go off and put up with all of this stuff. It's gotten so ridiculous at the moment. What else? Maybe the fraternities just figured, hey, we'll get the girls out of the hoop skirts, and that's perhaps part of the reasoning behind it. But they wouldn't admit that now, would they? 8 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story. News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com online means you can hear us anywhere. 33, a lot of blazing sunshine this morning. We're going to see things warm up rapidly once we actually get out of this first couple of hours following sunrise this morning. I wanted to share with you, when I turned on the television monitor here in the studio today, in the background, just because we like to track any breaking news, we usually have the Fox News channel. That's usually on in the background, and I just happened to look up at it during the actual radio news break, and the first 5 to 7 minutes of Fox News on television at the top of this hour, it's 9 o'clock for us, back on the East Coast, 11 o'clock for them, the news all dealt with a situation with Iran and Israel. You know, the president has given a speech to the people of Iran. Not that any of them have really seen it. I don't know how this got into his mind. I'm sure it was like, my fellow co-religionists, I would like to speak to you today about the need to destroy Jews. Oh, well, I shouldn't say that if the Americans are listening, but hopefully only you Iranians are hearing me today. And I don't much care for Bibi Netanyahu, and I know you feel the same. And whatever I can do to help you develop that nuclear bomb, please feel free to call. He's delivering an address to the Iranian people. The man is nuts. Maybe I'm overusing that word this week, but there's a screw loose in this guy. He has somehow decided, he is such a megalomaniac, so narcissistic, that he has suddenly decided that if he puts his imprimatur on it, that it's going to happen, and that he can solve all the world's problems, and that this is the one that he can work on and solve, and he doesn't need anybody else interfering with it. If Congress and the American people and the Israelis would just get out of the way, his genius would come to the forefront, and the rest of the world would be lighting candles. Everyone would light a candle to make the world a little bit more bright. Washington Post today. General David Petraeus. Now, you may remember him. He was a man who actually disagreed with, he was responsible for the surge that helped turn around the Iraqi war. He was opposed to the drawdown when Mr. Obama decided to bring all the troops home, leaving a vacuum there that has created a civil war and the rise of ISIS, and Iran also fighting in Iraq now, too, at this point. Petraeus then ended up in some sort of legal trouble after having a dispute with the president. Think Robert Menendez, the U.S. Senator from New Jersey, who's also had a run-in with the president and suddenly found himself indicted. These things will happen when you cross Barack Hussein Obama. Mr. Petraeus, though, now a private citizen, is speaking at a conference in Kurdistan, which is a segment that's still left in Iran and pretty much autonomous, where they've been able to hold off the Islamic State Islamic State fighters. Page 5 of an interview he did while he was at the conference with the Washington Post. And this is what he has to say. These are quotes. The current Iranian regime is not our ally in the Middle East. It is ultimately part of the problem, not the solution. While the U.S. and Iran may have convergent interest in the defeat of Daesh, he's talking about getting rid of the terrorist organizations, especially ISIS, our interests generally diverge. The Iranian response to the open hand offered by the U.S. has not been encouraging. In other words, despite the fact that John Kerry is over bicycling in France when his bicycle's actually working, and going to the occasional meeting with the Iranian Foreign Service and flashing smiles for the cameras as if things are actually getting done, the Iranians have been able to play this administration. Petraeus is saying so much. And he's saying it's very dangerous to be cross-tabling with these people as currently is happening. A couple of more points on this matter before we move on. This is from National Review. Dr. Charles Krauthammer, writing no peace anytime soon, but not because of Bibi. How many of these television correspondents, none of whom, by the way, have an expertise in foreign affairs other than they may speak a language, and so they've been sent halfway around the world, and they stand on a hotel balcony and say, one thing is for certain, things here in Tel Aviv will never be the same again. Really profound stuff like that they like to utter. They've all been saying, well, the options for peace now are pretty much dead. What peace? There wasn't any peace in the first place. What peace are they talking about? Well, the Arabs and the Iranians were going to lay down their arms in exchange for taking half of Israel. And that was what the American government wanted. That's what the American government would call peace. Krauthammer says, of all the idiocies uttered in relation to Benjamin Netanyahu's stunning election victory, none is more ubiquitous than the idea that peace prospects are now dead because Netanyahu has declared that there will be no Palestinian state while he's Israel's prime minister. The media is now saying he's backing off on that. I actually heard what he said. He didn't back off. He said, we can't do it with the current people that we're dealing with. And since those current people are likely going to be the future people, that means, of course, there will be no deal. Krauthammer goes on to write, there would be no peace and no Palestinian state if Isaac Herzog had been the prime minister. In other words, that was his main opponent in the election. Or Ehud Barak, or Ehud Olmert, for that matter. The latter two were prime ministers who offered Palestinians their own state, with its capital in Jerusalem and every Israeli settlement in the new Palestine uprooted, only to be rudely rejected. It's not ancient history, he says. It happened in 2000, 2001, and 2008. 3 astonishingly concessionary peace offers within the last 15 years, every one rejected. These people aren't looking for peace on the other side of this matter. They are looking, again, to destroy the Israelis. They see Jews and the Jewish state as a cancer. A friend of mine told me a story many, many years ago. He had been working in the Washington area, and he befriended an Egyptian couple. The husband was a wealthy doctor, and he got to know them, and they were, on the surface, very, what he would call, worldly. He knew that they were the Islamic faith, but he wasn't sure how strongly they really practiced the faith. And one night he was at dinner with them, and they were having a conversation, and the subject of Israel came up. And the doctor's wife just suddenly huffed and said, come on, they're only Jews. In other words, from the Arab perspective or the Persian perspective, that would be the Iranians, they're not human. So therefore, there's no reason to worry about coming to a peace settlement with them. We're eventually going to eradicate what we see as an infection, and that would be Jews. And for all of the blowhard caterwauling coming out of the White House at the moment, we do not acknowledge that apparently in Washington any longer. So I saw these things today, and it struck me that we're still having a lot of discussion about this, and it's going to perhaps go on. However, driving into work this morning, listening to Fox News at 5 a.m., I heard a story that said that somewhere around 350 members of the House and Senate have said to Mr. Obama, no, you will not make a deal with Iran unless you consult us. Now, when you stop and think about it, there are not, if you add up all of the Republicans, that would mean a lot of Democrats have joined in. In fact, that would mean a great many Democrats have signed on to that statement if we're up to around 350 and we're up to 360, I think this is the number. If that is the case, then what we are being told by members of the House and Senate is Mr. Obama has gone too far. And I think the last couple of weeks have proved that. And perhaps one thing that happened here is we were able to open the public's eyes with Mr. Netanyahu speaking in Washington on March 3rd, as well as this so-called letter to Iran from 47 U.S. senators led by Tom Cotton of Arkansas, which we also need to point out, despite all of Mr. Obama's minions, his acolytes, his sycophants in U.S. media, was not an actual letter sent to Iran. It was posted on the website of Senator Cotton. If you go online, you will notice that all of your U.S. senators and your U.S. representatives have their own websites. The letter was posted on his website. It wasn't mailed to anyone. It was just simply an open letter saying, hey, look, you can make a deal with Barack Obama, but it won't last. And he had 46 of his colleagues also sign up on that website saying that they backed that statement. And yet you've been led to believe by the two-faced, lying sacks of excrement in American media that somehow a letter was, they put a postage stamp on it and they sent it overseas, and the Iranian mullahs got this letter and went, that they went into some sort of rage, and that with that scotched any opportunity for Mr. Obama to come to a deal with them so they could go ahead and build their nuclear bomb. Which, if it had happened that way and they didn't get to build the nuclear bomb, would not have been a bad thing anyway. It's 9:18. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. I've got more coming up talking about the media, and I think a word to use is perfidy. It's a strong word, and it really reflects on people who have a tendency to lie a lot. Inveterate perfidy when it comes to U.S. media. I'm going to mention some of that a bit later if we have an opportunity about in relation to that story that came out of Ferguson, Missouri, which left police officers all over the country dead. Some folks among the liberals are finally fessing up that they were passing on lies about that whole story in order to gin up the violence. Yet none of them seem to be willing to take any responsibility for all the dead bodies that have now been left in the wake of that situation, or the people who were badly wounded because some thug who was egged on, obviously, by Sharpton and Jackson and the media, decided to start shooting at cops again just a couple of weeks ago in suburbs of St. Louis, Missouri. So if we get a chance, I want to mention that too as well. Also, a few other things that I happened to see just briefly this morning. We may have a deal coming out of Boise on teacher pay. That is raises for teachers. The idea being that it will give an incentive for young teachers to stay in Idaho versus taking off and looking for work elsewhere because they may be offered a higher paycheck outside of the state. In the meantime, 35 at our studios. We're up 5 degrees over the last hour. Headed for some temperature 73 to 75 perhaps before the day is over. 20 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as online anywhere around the world at newsradio1310.com. Associated Press Wire reporting today that state legislators in Idaho are suggesting, well, the Senate has already approved it, spending nearly $500,000, $400,000 to be accurate, to kill wolves. I've talked to a great many people since I started doing this radio show at the beginning of January, and it seems that killing wolves is a popular idea in these parts. The plan passed Thursday would give the Idaho Wolf Depredation Board the same funding it had during its first year of operation last year. Some Democrats objected, saying they didn't spend all the money they got last year, but it did pass by a 29-5 count. 5 of the 6 Democrats who were present decided to vote against it. I guess because they want to go out and hug the wolves and, we can't go killing wolves because it's a bit like the death penalty, and the death penalty is wrong, so killing wolves is like the death penalty, and that would be wrong. Well, can we pass a bill about abortion? No, abortion is good. Okay. But saving wolves, that's a good idea, and cutthroat killers in prisons, that's a good idea. Oh, yes. The plan passed 29-5. Republican Senator Steve Baer from Blackfoot says that Idaho is currently home to more than 600 wolves, well above the 100-wolf federal minimum. So they've done very well since they were introduced into the area. We can't say reintroduced because, as a caller said last week, these are not the timber wolves who once occupied the area. These are gray wolves. And there is a difference, obviously, between the two species. But the gray wolves are doing very, very well. It's a bit like the story I saw online today. Florida has discovered that the anacondas who have taken over the Everglades, this is because you have people who decided they wanted a sweet, cuddly anaconda as a pet and then discovered that they're sort of cold-blooded and nasty. They ended up dumping the ones that they were bringing in. They started dumping them out in the Everglades where they started breeding. Now they're eating everything in sight. And in order to try to measure how much the anacondas are eating, they decided to introduce more rabbits into the Everglades. Now, anybody who's ever raised rabbits knows exactly how the population can explode. In Australia one time, way back in the early part of the last century, they decided to introduce rabbits because they didn't have rabbits in Australia. They didn't really have many natural predators. Before they knew it, they were trying to capture all of these rabbits all over the continent. They had to build fences to try to hold the rabbits back because the migrating rabbits were just scouring the countryside. But that's not the case in Florida. They introduced the rabbits, and the rabbits immediately started begatting. And they were breeding like, well, rabbits do. And they had this huge population of rabbits, but then the weather got warmer. The study that looked at this in the last year to 2 years discovered as the weather got warmer, we came out of wintertime, and suddenly the appetite of the anaconda was much more ravenous. And all of a sudden, rabbits started disappearing in large numbers to the point where they couldn't reproduce. And remember, rabbits are great reproducers. They could not reproduce fast enough to maintain the population as they were being gobbled by the snakes. They know this because they put some tracking collars on some of the rabbits, and the tracking collars ended up in the gullets of the snakes, which is pretty obvious where the rabbits then ended up going. I got to tell you, I know a lot of people out there, the environmentalists who say it's a good idea to introduce these animals because they were once there, and gee, wouldn't it be wonderful to restore that balance? Don't always think through these things now, do they? And so we have a situation where we have 6 times as many wolves in Idaho as we, I guess, planned to have when this whole idea, this whole notion came about in the first place. So what we'll have is more of these hunts going on next year, where we'll put people up in the choppers and they'll fly around shooting the wolves dead on the ground in order to try to balance things out and perhaps save some of the livestock losses that have been going on because of the resurgence of these animals. It's 9:28. Bill Colley with you on call it newsradio1310.com if you're listening online. You can hear us anywhere all over the world. Also, News Radio 1310 KLIX, which is, I guess, what you'd call our mothership. And you could reach the program. I should say you should probably, if you're going to call, you should do it in the next segment because we're coming up pretty close right now to our next break. But if you'd like to talk to me in the next half hour, 736-0300. You can also email me, bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. That's bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. And I spell the last name Colley. I've got a couple of other state things I'd like to mention too as well, if I could just do it very, very quickly. The Idaho Statesman, which apparently like the Times News in Twin Falls, is controlled by, can you imagine this? Liberals. Can you imagine liberals running newspapers? I don't think it happens very often, but apparently the editorial board is almost a carbon copy. They had an editorial at the Statesman the other day saying that Idaho legislators, who are Republicans and therefore all bad because they're not like liberals over at the newspapers, they claim that the Idaho legislators all talk about how they want Washington out of the state's business, but on the other hand, that the state doesn't give the same courtesy to local governments. So I was taking a look through this, and so all of the complaints were, first, we'll get back to this in just a few minutes, but I think they're comparing apples and oranges. It's a bit of a stretch, a bit of a reach, and if I get a chance, I'd like to mention that in the next half hour. And also, speaking of media, how the media, some people in media are now finally admitting they lied when it came to the stories about Ferguson, Missouri, and they wanted to be duped. They knew they were being lied to, and they passed on the lie because it helped them establish a narrative that they wanted to foist upon the American people. Details ahead. It's 9:36 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. A great many people in state government, and it's not just Idaho, but in many other states, say that the federal government has way too much power in passing laws and regulations and then mandating that states follow Washington's lead. So you've got a lot of objections going on all over the country, people saying, let's be honest about this. We don't need a lot of these regulations, and we're going to try to do our best to nullify them. All right, I agree with that concept. On the other hand, people are asking at one liberal newspaper in Idaho if the folks who are in state government practice what they preach. In fact, an editorial at the Idaho Statesman this week makes the claim that state legislators, when it comes to dealing with local governments, don't extend the same courtesy. However, I think there is one major difference here. State government, it seems, when the federal government tries to mandate or regulate, state government has been standing up for the individual and your individual rights. When state government, according to this editorial, has been getting in the way of local governments in Idaho from making decisions, it appears state government is still doing the same mission, and that is standing up for individual rights. And they cite some examples here in an editorial where they talk about the city of Boise, which would like to regulate the Uber business. Now, Uber is what is replacing taxi cabs all over the country. And look, I can call my neighbor up and say, hey, the car's broken down. I need to go to the grocery store or the doctor. Can I give you $15 to give me a ride? That shouldn't be illegal. And Uber's no different than any of that. Why regulate it? Number two, Idaho schools want to retain the right to regulate knives on campus. And all right, when I was a kid, we took our own pocket knives to school, our jackknives, and we stand around in the third and fourth grade showing them off to our teachers, and our teachers would pull out their knives and say, check mine out. Local governments would like to have eminent domain, the writer says. Well, here you go again, to oppress the property owner. State government is standing up for the little guy. Then it says telemedicine. This one really got me. And caller, I'll get to you in just a moment. Be patient. They say that the telemedicine law has been shot down. Well, what they're talking about is the government in Boise, the state government, is not in any way trying to get in the way of people doing telemedicine, except for they don't want it used to perform abortions. Again, they're standing up now for the rights of the unborn. And so the lefties, they're trying to, we had an argument with the guy on the air yesterday about moral equivalence and apples and oranges. And this is exactly the same argument being put forth by the people who run this newspaper. 936, we'll call it. 36 is our temperature, and you're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX with Bill Colley on Top Story.
Bill, I'd like to talk a little bit about your last topic on your last segment about the wolves.
Yes.
And why is it that people cannot understand that every time the government gets involved, it costs 3 times what it should? Everybody wants the government involved because they want a piece of the pie. Do they realize they only get a dime out of every dollar that floats? Hawaii did the same thing. They had a mouse problem, so they brought in the mongoose. The mongoose was out during the day, and the mice were out at night, and pretty soon we had 2 problems. You've got goats and everything else. You know, they want to spend all this money to get rid of the wolves that we told them that was going to be a problem. Now, I suggest instead of spending excessive amounts of money for somebody getting paid $30 an hour to fly in a helicopter to shoot them, put up more tags. Hunters will go do it for them for a penny on the dollar.
I would think it would be good sport for a lot of these people.
Oh yeah, but no, we want to raise taxes and waste money. People need to wake up that the government is just wasteful. They don't care. A company cares about profit. The government doesn't care. They just keep spending.
Spending and regulating.
It's just ridiculous. But nobody will wake up and see what's going on.
Thank you much for the call. I think, though, that we have at least a core of people who understand exactly what's going on. It's getting your voice heard, but it's no different on the state level than it is at the national level. I would think if you were to take a poll, for instance, of the president's efforts to make peace with the Iranians, which, it seems to me that that's an oxymoron, the poll overwhelmingly would show Americans don't agree, and yet he plans to go ahead with it. I would think if you took a poll of his amnesty plan, you would find Americans are overwhelmingly opposed, but it doesn't matter. He's going to go ahead with it. And here on the level of people introducing wolves in the area and the objections from the public, which happen to be overwhelming, once again, ignored. Well, the whole idea is we're supposed to have representative government because it's not truly a democracy, but you have representatives who you send to argue your case for you, whether it be at your state capitol or whether it be at your federal capitol. And nobody's paying any attention to them. Or once they get there, they're not being loud enough, or they're being co-opted. Or simply because they turned over so much of their responsibility to bureaucrats, it doesn't matter anymore. 9:39, coming up on 9:40, 37 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, which means you can hear us anywhere around the world. Just to tune in online, if you're checking out our website, plenty of great stories there too as well. News stories from across the region and elsewhere across the state. If I get a chance coming up in the next segment, I want to talk to you about a fellow by the name of Jonathan Capehart. He's an editor at the Washington Post. Did you know that as this company Starbucks, which if you go to like Washington D.C. On some parts of downtown Washington, there's a Starbucks on every corner. I kid you not. You go down a block, there's another Starbucks. Go down a block, another Starbucks. All the office workers who are coming down and filling up, guzzling down their lattes before they actually head off to work, get fueled up on all of that caffeine. Starbucks CEO is saying that he wants his baristas. What they call the people who actually pour the coffee. They're getting minimum wage, but we'll call them baristas and they'll feel better about themselves. He wants them to engage customers in discussions about race. Somebody's going to get smacked here before it's all said and done. But did you know they have no Starbucks in Selma, Alabama, and they have no Starbucks in Ferguson, Missouri? So much for all of his race talk. Jonathan Capehart, who's an editor at the Washington Post, flaming liberal, came out and said the other day in a column that he had been lied to and he had helped spread the lie. He said, hands up, don't shoot is an obvious lie. And now he feels bad because he's besmirched Officer Wilson, the fellow who was accused of shooting that poor, meek young black man who had just, of course, roughed up an owner at a convenience store while stealing cigars and then tried to take Officer Wilson's gun away from him. Mr. Capehart says, well, we goofed. We made a mistake. And, of course, that mistake may have led to the deaths of a couple of police officers in New York and the critical wounding of a couple of police officers in Ferguson, Missouri, and who knows how many other attacks because of people going around saying the police are bad and using this as the cover. So here you finally have someone in media stepping up and saying, you know what? We were wrong. He also said the other day that Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois was wrong when he claimed that the lack of action on the new candidate for, what was it, Attorney General, he said that was making her sit at the back of the bus. And Mr. Capehart, who happens to be black, says that's a bunch of baloney. 9:45, you're on the air with Bill Colley. Again, we keep getting these calls from outer space. Either that or it's the government monitor just checking in. They do that a couple of times per day, from what I understand. You obviously realize, if you're even calling a talk radio station, that there's somebody in the NSA who's keeping track of all of this, no matter how small that station, how small that city, anywhere on the country. That, well, could have been them. 37 right now, 9:46. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You're on the air.
Yes, when this happens, you like to hope that MSNBC and CNN would somehow cover it, and, other sources, just NBC, ABC, and CBS, and actually say, listen, here we have a logical explanation by a black man who is a liberal. But you see, divisiveness is all that drives these people. You know who Sheriff David Clark is from Milwaukee County?
Yeah, see him on TV quite a bit.
He is one sharp cat, and I'm going to tell you, he is black, and what goes on with this Justice Department infuriates this man. He's more articulate than Holder could ever be. And so, you see, whenever you have these people that are literally, whether or not it's online or wherever else, that are black, saying, listen, it's up to us to change this. And it truly is. But, when we perpetuate the victimhood of this, it just, like I've said the other day, race relations in this country, it's just like this black artist last night. She hates America. She hates everything about America. She hates these fat white people in the middle of the country who live on their farms and their racist grandmothers. This kind of thing, it's such BS that you just are sick of it.
In fact, in the case of people like her, we should just simply start taking up collections to buy them one-way plane tickets out of the country. Thank you much for the call. Hey, there got to be plenty of other places they would feel welcome. Nigeria, she could go, paint pictures of the members of Boko Haram while they were trying to sell her into slavery and convert her to Islam. We could send her off to a fight with the folks in ISIS, and she could be abused by all of them and passed around among the members. She might find after a while, though, that the United States is not such a bad place after all. The whiners and complainers, I have a friend, I used to work with him at a TV station in the late 1990s. He was from Nigeria. He was raised Muslim, but after he converted to Christianity, he decided he better get out of the country because there were people who wanted to kill him. He'd actually worked for one of the leaders. Of course, there's so many different governments that have come and gone there. It's not a picture of stability. And then he and his wife ended up moving to Australia. She's a college professor, and he's an electrical engineer. And from Australia, they then moved to Las Vegas when she got a job at UNLV. And then later on, she got a job with the State University of New York, and he ended up working as the chief engineer of a TV station I was working at. And we got to be good friends. And one day we had to go to a conference together, and we had to drive about 2 miles, or 2 hours rather, on the road, going to the conference. And he told me, he said, black people in this country don't realize how good they have it. Now that's coming from him. And he is darker than most black people in the United States. And he said, I've had nothing but wonderful opportunities here, and I've taken advantage of them. And he said, the point of the matter is, you've got to be willing to do that. No one's going to give it to you. The Huckabee Report is on the way, brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. 736-6563. That's 736-6563. Thank you very much, Governor Huckabee. And, of course, we're in the last couple of minutes this week of Top Story with Bill Colley. And I'd like to thank you for joining me throughout the week, of course, and hope you can join us again next week. Rush Limbaugh will follow the news from Fox at 10 o'clock. Sean Hannity following Fox News at 1 o'clock. And, of course, Glenn Beck following Fox News at 4 o'clock this afternoon. I was going to try to mention something about that story about teacher pay raises in Idaho. But since we were on the story in the last few minutes about race relations in this country, do any of you know who Stephen A. Smith is? He's known, of course, for his work on ESPN over the years and some other sports networks, but he's also a highly talented sports writer and just a highly talented writer altogether. He was speaking at a conference when he said that he wishes every black American would vote Republican for at least one election. Now, over the years, I have been hearing Stephen A. Smith talk, and as what I've discovered in the last decade or so is that his politics have started to move from being very liberal down the continuum past center, and he has now started to move toward the right of center and beyond, which means he's not going to be very welcome at ESPN, which is filled with liberals. I mean, I know some of the people who work there. I can attest to that. I used to work with Mike Tirico at a TV station back in the late 1980s. Liberal. And the main photographer who shoots most of the interviews for that network, Tony Melfi, used to be one of my main photographers when I was in TV. Liberal. So, the whole place is just a den of liberals for the most part. But every once in a while, you get a guy who leaves the farm, and Stephen A. Smith seems to be doing that right now. He was trying to explain at the conference, he said, people historically missed the big picture. He was talking about the Civil Rights Act of the 1960s. He says, it was Democrats who were against civil rights legislation, the Southern Dixiecrats. But because President Johnson was a Democrat, black America assumed the Democrats were for it. In other words, they paid no attention to the fact that over in the Senate and the House, all of these Southern Democrats were trying to oppress them. But since Johnson was a Democrat, they didn't look beyond his office, figuring, I guess, he rules by fiat, just like they feel their current president rules by fiat. Of course, he does feel that way, too. Smith went on to say black folks in America are telling one party, we don't give a darn about you. They're telling the other party, you've got our vote. Therefore, you have labeled yourself disenfranchised because one party knows they've got you under their thumb, and the other party knows they'll never get you and nobody comes to address your interest. During his impassioned monologue, Smith likened blacks voting for Republicans to customers, quote, shopping around, unquote, essentially asking shops to, quote, cater to them, unquote, so that they will do business. And then he went on to say, quote, we don't do that with politics, and then we blame white America for our disenfranchisement, unquote. Very well said from a man who originally cut his teeth essentially covering sports around the country and then started broadening his horizons and has come to the conclusion that perhaps too many people out there are looking for someone else to do it for them. And his point being, sorry, it doesn't work that way. If you want something, you've got to engage. You've got to engage with all the political players. And you've also got to get out there and, do this on your own. No one's going to do it for you. 9:57. Won't be long before he's on a speaking tour with Lieutenant Colonel Alan West. I'd pay to see that. 9:58, coming up on 9:58 from 9:57. 39 at our studios. We're looking for a high today, projected at 73. That'll be the warmest day for another full week. Perhaps, possibly, some rain coming up on Monday. That will be well worth it. Most people in the area looking forward to at least a little bit of rain so we can make some things grow. In the meantime, Bill Colley saying have a great weekend. This is Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. God willing and the creek don't rise, I get to do this all over again coming up Monday morning, 8 o'clock right here in the studios at KLIX.